I want to read you a few passages from other older, long-standing Christian, operators on this, from a couple of key books that would be well worth reading. This book by Miles Stanford called The Green Letters is deep, and he talks about this process in there. He refers to the passage where Jesus said, "Unless a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." And so he was saying this about his own death, that I have to go to my death now so that God can use that to bear fruit. And that's a picture, because in the very next verse he says, "And if anyone wants to follow me, let him come where I am, and there he will be also." And so this death and resurrection of Christ, which has already been applied to us in our position, is now going to be carried out gradually in our condition. And we're going to undergo a death process. Here's what Stanford says about it. "For most of us, it's been a long season of growth from the tiny green blade up to the full corn in the ear. So many seek to settle for this stage, saved with heaven assured, plus a pacifying measure of Christian respectability, at least in church circles. Here we have the believer as a normal kernel of wheat containing life inside a more or less shiny golden covering or shell, in fellowship high up on the stalk with similar kernels of wheat. This is but a stage, not the goal. And like middle age, this can be a dangerous stage, one of seeking a much-deserved rest, of basking aimlessly in the fellowship of meetings, classes, etc., of ignoring or forgetting the struggling and growing pains of the tiny green blades down at one's feet, and expecting and exhorting them to shape up and mature without delay. Oh, this is all very cozy but costly, snug but sterile. The seed corn must be, may be beautiful, but it's hard. The germ of life is locked up within its shell and cannot get out, and therefore it produces nothing. Here's the reason why so many Christians, even preachers, are so unfruitful. The life of Christ is in there. It's real, but it's locked up in that shell. That kernel has to fall into the ground. The water invades it and the shell blasts open. You know what it's like when seeds germinate. And this is the picture that Jesus has painted, which he's commenting on. Well, we often come across Christians who are bright and clever, strong and righteous. In fact, a little too bright, a little too clever. There seems to be so much of self in their strength, and their righteousness is severe and critical. They have everything to make them saints except crucifixion, which would mold them into a supernatural tenderness and limitless charity for others. Oh, that's a lot of what God's after right here, yeah. To be broken, a broken Christian. A lot of our harsh, critical attitudes are what are broken. That's fleshly. And in its place just comes this love. That's what he wants to bring out. When we say conform to the image of Christ, we're really talking about becoming a loving person here. But God has a winepress prepared for them, through which they will someday pass, and which will turn the metallic hardness of their nature into gentle love, which Christ always brings forth at the last of the feasts. There is a further stripping right down to the germ of life, right on down until there's nothing left but Christ, who is our life. Down, down into death. Whew. This can scare you a little bit if you take it seriously. I remember reading that as a student thinking, I don't know, man. No, if I want to see something like that happen, that sounds rough. Hey, I was already suffering at the time. I'm thinking, so you're saying there's much, much more? Oh, man, I don't know, man. Yeah, yes, it is. Oh, yeah. All the way down into death. Let's hear some comments from Watchman Nee in his awesome book, The Normal Christian Life. Hey, if you've never read this book, you're hurting. This book is the bomb. This book is awesome, man. You've got to read that book. It'll take a while, okay? Take your time on it. It's not a quick read. It could take you It took me about 6 months to get through this book first time, because I'd only make it through a couple of pages and I'd just be sitting there just pondering what I was reading. Anyway, as he gets down through it, and it's about Romans, by the way. As he gets down to it toward the end, he gets into a chapter called Bearing the Cross. And guess what that's about? It's about our subject tonight. He says, no one can be a true servant of God without knowing the principle of death and the principle of resurrection. Life out of death. It is in this sense that Paul, writing to the Philippians, expressed the desire that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed unto his death, that I may attain to the resurrection from the dead in this life, he goes on to say. This mark of death is upon the soul at all time, to bring it to the place where it is always subordinate to the Spirit and never independently asserts itself. Now, Paul uses the term soul life for the flesh. That's roughly equivalent to the flesh, or the self-life is the soul. And when we're living soulishly, in his terminology, that's when we're depending on the powers of our flesh, our old nature, rather than on Christ. He talks about Matthew 10. That's the one where Jesus says, if you want to come after me, you have to pick up your cross daily and follow me. And he says, you note that to follow the Lord in the way of the cross is set before us as his normal, his only way for us. But what immediately follows? He that finds his soul shall lose it, and he that loses his soul for my sake shall find it. Yeah, that's the next verse. Oh, that's that riddle Jesus gave. Yeah. We have to be willing to lose our life. Now, some translations translate this to find his life will lose it, and he that loses his life for my sake will find it. But ni is correct. The word here is not the normal word for life, either zoeing or bios, which we get biology from, but a third word, psyche, which is the soul. Psyche we get psychology from. It's our soul life that we lose. He says, if you're willing to lose that, then you'll gain real life. It's another example of this life out of death thing. God must bring us to a point, I cannot tell you how it will be, but he will do it, where through a deep and dark experience, our natural power is touched and fundamentally weakened so that we no longer dare trust ourselves. He has had to deal with some of us very strangely and take us through difficult and painful ways in order to get us there. You're living by the natural life, and that life varies a great deal. It's the slave of your temperament. When emotionally you're set on his way, you go ahead at full speed. But when your emotions are directed the other way, you're reluctant to move at all, even when duty calls. Oh, that instability we experience all the time because we're the playthings of our flesh nature. You're not pliable in the Lord's hands. And he has to therefore weaken that strength of preference, of like and dislike in you, until you will do a thing because he wants it and not because you like it. You may enjoy it, you may not, but you'll do it just the same. Every true servant of God must know at some time that disabling from which he can never recover. He can never be quite the same again. There must be that established in you, which means that from henceforth you will really fear yourself. Oh, I don't know. I resonate with that. I do. I think that's what happens.